Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's good to see you here. My name is Lesley Bartlett. I'm chair of the Department of Educational Policy Studies and have the honor of introducing our guest today. Before we start, just want to acknowledge that we are standing on stolen land and that we continually need to think about the kinds of obligations that we owe, given that historic debt, and colonialism as an ongoing process, decolonialism hopefully as an ongoing process as well. It's my pleasure today to introduce Professor Peter Youngs, who is a 2003 graduate of the Department of Educational Policy Studies, where he completed his doctorate with Professor Michael Olnick. I actually looked up his dissertation this morning. The title is District Induction Policy and Support for Beginning Teachers in 3 Connecticut Districts. And we were talking in my class just before this Zoom about case selection. So sometime I'd love to hear about different case selection strategies in the many different projects that Professor Youngs has been a part of. He is currently, yes, Jenny's clapping because she was in that class. He's currently a professor in the Department of Curriculum, Instruction, and Special Education at University of Virginia, and his research interests focus on how teacher preparation, induction, and school social context are associated with beginning teachers' instructional practices, their commitment, and retention of teachers in districts. He received the AERA Division K, which is the Teaching and Teacher Education Early Career Award, previously served as co-editor of Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis, and currently serves as co-editor of American Educational Research Journal and as co-editor of a forthcoming volume of the Handbook of Education Policy Research, among the many other things that he does and leadership he provides to the field. Professor Youngs, we're delighted to have you here with us and look forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much, Lesley. I want to thank you for inviting me to present and meet with folks, and for the gracious introduction. I first will just say it's very exciting for me to connect again with students and faculty from EPS. Lesley was referring to this, but actually started my graduate work in EPS in 1995, 28 years ago, so a long time ago. Did a master's and PhD, and I'm aware that one of my cohort mates is part of our group today, Kevin Kumashiro. So before I go into my talk, I'm just going to tell a quick story. Kevin and I were good friends and still are good friends and colleagues. But we were taking a course called EPS 920, Social Analysis of Educational Policy, in our first semester, and learning a lot from the course. And it was late November, early December, and several of us were just worried about turning in the final paper. And Kevin was the person who told us that not only had he finished his final paper by the end of November, our first semester of graduate school, but it had already been accepted by Harvard Education Review. And I believed what he was saying. So he definitely tricked me on that one. But it's great to be back with Kevin, with Lesley, and with several of you. I'm going to go ahead and show some slides. So the first thing I'll say is that I'm presenting a study. It's titled The Development of Ambitious Instruction, How Beginning Elementary Teachers' Preparation Experiences are Associated with Their Mathematics and English Language Arts Instructional Practices. Feel free to raise questions as we go, and you can just go ahead and interject. I think Michael's going to try to help me identify if folks are raising questions in the chat. And we definitely should have some time before the end of the hour after I finish presenting for more questions and reactions. And I just want to acknowledge several co-authors on this work. As part of presenting this research, I want to acknowledge that the larger study that the article is part of was funded by the Spencer Foundation and the National Science Foundation. And I do want to say a little bit about the co-PIs for this project. They were mentioned on the previous slide. But Julie Cohen at the University of Virginia, Dorothea Nagdastopoulos at the University of Connecticut, and 2 colleagues from Michigan State, Corey Drake and Spiros Konstantopoulos, were sort of instrumental in working with me on the larger study. How are we doing? Great. Perfect. And I can see individuals who are here as well. Just acknowledging our funders. And I appreciate Leslie's introduction. I'm just going to say a little bit more about my background. I'm a former elementary school teacher. I worked both in Cleveland, Ohio, and New York City, Lower Manhattan, PS 11. As Lesley mentioned, I completed my PhD in Ed Policy Studies at Wisconsin-Madison in 2003, worked closely with Michael Olnick, and I also worked closely with Fred Newman, and just want to acknowledge Fred was a terrific mentor to me. Unfortunately, he recently passed away at the age of 85 after a very productive career, and I would say a very productive retirement. In his retirement, Fred did a lot of volunteering for Habitat for Humanity and played in a bluegrass band and worked on a lot of Democratic political campaigns. So just want to acknowledge both Michael and Fred for being terrific mentors. In terms of my own background, I worked as a professor at Michigan State University for 9 years, and I've been at University of Virginia for the past 9 years. Okay, today's topic. To set some context, as you folks are no doubt aware, the Common Core State Standards, first issued in 2010, and other state content standards call for elementary teachers to engage in ambitious instruction. And we, in terms of our larger research study, would define ambitious instruction as teaching practices that are focused both on promoting students' deep conceptual understanding of academic content, but also holding them and helping them meet rigorous learning goals. Another way of thinking about ambitious instruction is teachers sort of actively taking steps to position all of their learners as individuals who are capable of engaging in meaningful disciplinary work, and the teacher at the same time is looking for ways to provide instructional scaffolding, to provide supports, and making instructional and disciplinary practices explicit to them. We know there's widespread evidence that such teaching practices are not the norm in the US. We might be thinking about elementary math instruction. We might be thinking about secondary science instruction. Our focus in this study is elementary teacher preparation and looking for ways in which preparation can help beginning teachers enact such practices, both in math and reading language arts. So this is just a little bit of a hint of where the talk is going. The study I'm presenting today is based on collecting classroom observation data and survey data from over 80 teaching candidates and following them into their first year of full-time teaching. They participated in what we refer to as the Elementary Teacher Preparation Project. That's a pseudonym. And during the study, we investigated the teaching candidates and first-year teachers' characteristics. I'll say more about that as we go forward. There are opportunities to learn during teacher preparation in coursework and in field or clinical experiences, and how their teaching assignments, all of these factors might be predicting or be associated with, as first-year teachers, their enactment of ambitious math and ELA instruction. So we could describe this as a mid-scale study. This study has 83 participants, not 500 or 1,000. It's also a good deal larger and more robust than a number of useful, in-depth, small-scale qualitative studies that have looked at similar topics. So the mid-scale nature really allowed us to follow a larger number of teaching candidates than a number of small-scale studies. And it allowed us to really look directly at beginning teachers' actual instructional practices. Often large-scale studies are making use of state administrative data. They may be focused on teachers' impact on student learning, but less able to sort of gather and analyze information about instructional practices. So I'm going to spend a few slides giving you like a bit of background in terms of literature that informed our work and laying out ways in which the study we've been engaged with is trying to contribute to or build on some of this research. And the first thing to do is just to present a definition of opportunity to learn. This comes from work by Bill Schmidt and colleagues. They define opportunity to learn as the content to which future teachers are exposed as part of their teacher preparation programs. And one can think about trying to collect data or learn about opportunity to learn in the context of courses, in the context of field placements. There can be other settings as well, community field placements, opportunities to learn once someone becomes a first-year teacher. As we're referencing this before, there are a number of small-scale qualitative studies that have really looked in depth at different ways of sort of introducing ambitious teaching practices to teaching candidates, both with representations of ambitious practice and providing opportunities for teaching candidates to learn to enact them in increasingly complex environments. And a lot of that work sort of set the stage for some of our questions and the work we're doing here. There have also been qualitative studies that have built on these initial smaller qualitative studies to actually follow teaching candidates into their first or second year of full-time teaching. And from a more longitudinal perspective, really try to understand, is it sort of the teaching candidate's own beliefs or knowledge or academic ability? Does that help explain like what happens with their instructional quality, their instructional practices as beginning teachers? Maybe it's certain things that are happening in coursework or student teaching that drives their teaching practices in their first or second year. But maybe it's more the school context, less what's happening in pre-service teacher education and more school context. Work by Pam Grossman has really looked carefully at this. Melinda Lako and Mary Brownell have looked at this with special ed teaching candidates. There's been useful research in secondary science doing this. And I think one of the key questions in this research is, what would sort of account for variation among individuals who are going through the same preparation experiences in terms of their teaching practices as first and second year teachers. So these studies have really started to move the field to consider those sorts of questions and begin to have some initial findings there. Now, in contrast, there have been a set of studies over the last 10 to 12 years that have also examined questions around elementary candidates' opportunities to learn in teacher preparation, and often have data from multiple preparation programs, as well as data on teachers' impact on student learning as first and second year teachers. And often these studies are raising questions about, can we tease out differences across teacher education programs from New York City, for example, or from an individual state, and maybe identify some programs that are doing particularly well, some programs that are doing less well. In general, these studies have not reported many differences among teacher preparation programs in terms of their graduates' impact on student learning. A few exceptions are work by Don Boyd, Susanna Loeb, Jim Wyckoff, looking in particular at opportunities to acquire content knowledge or pedagogical content knowledge as elementary teachers, and also looking at characteristics of student teaching placements. So this work using larger scale data has found some associations between opportunity to learn and certain student teaching placements and beginning teacher effectiveness. Sort of our critique as a research team would be, when some of these studies have started to use classroom observation data with first and second year teachers, they're often using observation instruments that tell us some general things about practice, some things maybe about beginning teachers planning or classroom management, or thinking about instruction in a generic way, but not necessarily examining questions about opportunity to learn and enactment of content-specific practices or ambitious practices. Say a little bit more about research that has informed our work. We're very interested in some of the work, and my colleague Julie Cohen is engaged in this. There's earlier work from the past 10, 15 years that when we're trying to understand elementary teachers' development of instructional practices, these practices often vary across content areas. In the US, many elementary teachers are multiple subject teachers. They're expected to teach mathematics, reading language arts, but other subjects as well, often science, history, social studies. And from a research standpoint and a standpoint of instructional coaching and supporting beginning elementary teachers, it's important to keep in mind that how one's teaching in reading language arts does not necessarily translate to the nature of their teaching or how well they're teaching in other subjects. From our standpoint, we'd argue there's a need to examine beginning elementary teachers' practices in multiple subjects and use content-specific observation instruments for this purpose. We've definitely seen a number of studies that have really probed teachers' content knowledge for teaching or their pedagogical content knowledge. Heather Hill and others have made an argument that one's content knowledge, their pedagogical content knowledge, really can make a difference for instructional quality, especially in mathematics. We've also seen research on teaching self-efficacy and how that can play a role in sort of enacting more rigorous or demanding forms of instruction. And it's worth pointing out, this is part of what we're trying to capture in our research design, that even teachers' grade level assignments are often associated with outcomes, including classroom observation ratings. So another aspect of the context that it's important to consider. Okay, I have several slides on literature. This is the final one, then we'll move into the study I'm presenting today. One thing we know from research using classroom observation instruments is that based on quantitative data, there's often strong associations between teachers' instructional practices, how they're rated in terms of the quality of their instruction, and what's known about students' characteristics, especially the students' prior achievement scores. So it's sort of a caveat that we need to be a little bit careful about what we're actually learning or being able to conclude from classroom observation ratings. From a more qualitative perspective, my colleague Dorothea Anagnostopoulos in other work has really looked closely at how, for a first-year teacher who's got this goal of teaching rigorous, ambitious instructional practices, the key role of effective classroom management practices. And one thing that Anagnostopoulos and colleagues have sort of documented with qualitative research is that when management practices are focusing on such things as student ownership over learning, caring, promoting caring relationships between teachers and students, and classroom management practices that are sort of affirming and valuing students' cultural backgrounds, this is often associated with teachers being in a better position to implement more ambitious instruction. Okay, so we tried to address several research questions in this study. The ones that are highlighted in red are the ones I'm going to focus on in this presentation. One of our questions was just simply how are elementary teaching candidates' characteristics associated with their ability to enact ambitious instruction, both in math and reading language arts in their first year of teaching. We wanted to understand how first-year teachers' enactment of effective classroom management might predict or be associated with their enactment of ambitious practices in these two subjects. And in terms of this sort of opportunity to learn, the potential role of pre-service teacher preparation, we wanted to ask how are first-year teachers' learning opportunities in courses and student teaching associated with their enactment of ambitious instruction in math and reading. Say a little bit about our methods. The sample for the study I'm presenting here included 83 first-year teachers. They graduated from 5 universities in 3 states. I'm going to say a little bit more about the larger sample at the outset of the study in a moment. So each of these 83 teachers that I'm focusing on today, they completed an elementary teaching candidate survey. During their final year of preparation, we actually were following two cohorts of final year candidates, people who graduated in 2015-16 and those who graduated in 2016-17. Each of these candidates also completed a survey of content knowledge for teaching in math and a survey of content knowledge for teaching and reading. I'll say more about those in a moment or two. And we as a research team sort of made a commitment once these individuals were in their first year of teaching to observe each of them teach 3 mathematics lessons and 3 reading language arts lessons over the course of the school year. And all these first year teachers completed our first year teacher survey. So this larger study, we sort of set out with 2 cohorts of candidates at each of 5 programs to really recruit as many candidates as we could into the larger study. And there were a little over 900 candidates who were eligible to be in our study. And about 55%, 502 of them, completed the elementary teaching candidate survey in their final year of teacher preparation. So the sample of first year teachers that I'm talking about today sort of represents individuals who completed that survey, began teaching in grades kindergarten through 5, and participated in classroom observations. And I'll do this a couple of times throughout the talk, just to sort of acknowledge some of the challenges in conducting this type of research. One was, and I was aware of this before we started the study, but it really just was something we had to confront as we carried out the study. Many graduates in elementary teacher preparation programs do not become full-time K through 5 teachers, at least right away. Some of them may become teachers at the early childhood level. Some of them may be dual certified in general education and special education, and they might go into special education. Some may become middle school teachers, and a number of people may not teach, or at least not teach full-time right away. We ended up keeping about 175 people in our study who had graduated and become first-year teachers, but a number of them worked in districts that actually denied our request to collect classroom observation data. So in addition to the 83 we're talking about today, there were roughly another 85 to 90 who stayed in the study by completing some surveys and participating in interviews. But there definitely were different challenges here in terms of trying to carry out this classroom observation-based study. Okay, I'm going to walk through some methods and explain some things about our survey measures. So a key thing in this study was really trying to understand some things about teaching self-efficacy. We had 10 items in our survey that focused on participant self-efficacy with regard to teaching mathematics. And then, 5 of those items focused on self-efficacy with regard to teaching mathematics. And then there were basically 5 parallel items that focused on self-efficacy with regard to teaching ELA. There's a few examples here on the slide. Now, it's also important to point out we had 2 items in our elementary teaching unit survey that really addressed opportunities to learn general principles of instruction. And I'll read these to you. Up to this point in your teacher education program, how much opportunity have you had to learn about general principles and theories of instruction and general methods of teaching? Clearly, our focus was on content-specific instruction and content-specific opportunities to learn, but we wanted to get some sense of opportunities in teacher preparation to learn more general things about promoting student motivation, about managing a classroom productively, about assessment in kind of general ways, not content-specific ways. So that was the reason for those 2 items. There were 2 sets of opportunity to learn items in our elementary teacher candidate survey. And this was, at least at the outset, kind of the heart of our study. So we asked about a series of opportunities to learn, try out and receive feedback on 12 mathematics instructional strategies and 11 reading language arts instructional strategies. There's just a few examples here. And happy to go through the additional items here as well. But this is sort of our focus on learning opportunities related to enacting ambitious instruction. And 6 items in the elementary teaching candidate survey address candidates' opportunities to learn about working with diverse students. There's a few examples here as well. So to think about opportunity to learn in general in this study, we wanted to know about learning opportunities with regard to general methods, general, principles of instruction, opportunities to learn content-specific instructional strategies, and opportunities to learn about working with diverse groups of students. The study had 2 surveys of content knowledge for teaching. One of them is widely used. My guess is several of you are familiar with it. It was a survey of mathematical knowledge for teaching and number and operations. We chose number and operations. This is an area of elementary mathematics that represents roughly 50 to 60% of the K-5 elementary math curriculum. And surveys developed by Heather Hill and colleagues of MKT have been widely used in research. We also used a survey of teachers' knowledge of reading and reading practices. It primarily focuses on grades K-3. We found this helpful as well. This has not been used as widely in research. Okay, so for this study, we were using the Protocol for Language Arts Teaching Observation, or PLATO. It's a classroom observation instrument first developed by Pam Grossman. And PLATO was actually first developed for use with secondary English language arts teachers. My colleague Julie Cohen, in her dissertation work 10 years ago, adapted PLATO for use in elementary mathematics. PLATO actually addresses a number of different features of instruction, and they're organized around 3 instructional factors: instructional scaffolding, representation and organization of content, and disciplinary demand. And PLATO also is focused around a 4th domain, classroom environments. So in 2016-17, and again in 2017-18, our goal was to observe each of our 83 observation participants as they taught math 3 times and as they taught reading 3 times. Another challenge in work like this, given the large amount of video data we were collecting on teachers' instructional practices, was training graduate students, postdocs, faculty members to score these observed lessons using PLATO in a reliable way. So we were able to do that, but it is resource-intensive work. I will acknowledge that. Okay, to say a little bit about our analytic strategies, this study featured multiple regression. We ran a number of single-level regression analyses. And for each of our regression models, we were testing one of the 4 PLATO domains, either in math or ELA, as the outcome variable. These, again, were instructional scaffolding, disciplinary demand, representation of content in classroom environment, which is getting at teachers' classroom management practices. So in each of these models, we included teacher characteristics. This could have been their math knowledge for teaching. This could have been their self-efficacy. This might have been their gender, their race, ethnicity. But we also, in each model, were including characteristics of participants' teaching assignments. We knew the grade level they were teaching. We knew some characteristics of their school as a whole in terms of the student demographics. When we moved into our third research question, here we were trying to explain the different Plato instructional domains, again, instructional scaffolding, representation of content, disciplinary demand. So we would enter the classroom environment, classroom management domain as a predictor, and then vice versa. When we're trying to predict the teacher's classroom environment practices as the outcome, we entered a composite score for the 3 instructional domains as a predictor. And for our final research question, the opportunity to learn question, we included the 3 predictors for the different types of opportunity to learn. Learning opportunities around general methods, around content-specific methods, and around working with diverse students. Okay, I'm not sure how visible this is, but I'm going to take a few minutes and sort of give you, from a narrative standpoint, what our main findings were. There are more findings in terms of factors explaining enactment of ambitious math instruction. We'll get in a moment to findings with regard to enacting ambitious reading or English language arts instruction. In the ELA findings, there's fewer of them, and they mirror a couple of the ones in math. So the first thing to say is that we found that opportunities to learn general principles of instruction, you can see that as the first row under the bold opportunities to learn, was consequential in both subjects. So here for math, teaching candidates reporting relatively more substantial opportunities to learn general principles of instruction. This translated in, as first-year teachers into higher ratings for their instructional scaffolding in math teaching and disciplinary demand, the rigor of disciplinary expectations they were setting for students. And I'll say a little bit more about this in the discussion. This was not necessarily like a hypothesis or something we expected when we went into the study. And this held true in ELA as well. When we look at using classroom management to predict other outcomes, one thing we found here, it's consistent with other studies, is that the classroom environment scores that the candidates were earning actually predicted their Plato math scores for instructional scaffolding, disciplinary demands, and representation of content. Sort of stands to reason, but strong predictive value for having good classroom management practices. With teaching self-efficacies, there's a couple findings with regard to math that might seem a little bit contradictory. The candidates who report during teacher preparation having higher self-efficacy with regard to teaching math as first-year teachers were fairly strong with classroom management practices, but then there was a negative association with their enactment of instructional scaffolding and representation of content. So self-efficacy, when someone is having it or developing as a teaching candidate, translates into better management practices, but not necessarily enactment of ambitious instructional practices. And finally, coming back a little bit to the heart of the study, at least at the outset, for the student teaching context, when candidates had opportunities to learn a number of different math instructional strategies, to try them out, to receive feedback on them, this definitely translated into higher ratings for instructional scaffolding, for representation of content, but actually had a negative association with their classroom management practices. So almost a bit of a trade-off in terms of what's being emphasized during student teaching and what that means in terms of your practices as a first-year teacher. The results for reading language arts, they're fewer. They are consistent with some things I was sharing with the math results, going back to sort of learning opportunities around general principles of instruction. This is sort of learning about student motivation, classroom management, different general approaches to assessment. This again pays off for enacting ambitious practices, instructional scaffolding and disciplinary demand, and sort of having higher classroom management ratings translated into enacting disciplinary demand and representation of content at high levels in ELA. So fewer findings, but also consistent with some of the math findings. Let me take a few minutes and sort of connect this to other studies and maybe talk a little bit about where this research may go in the future, and then happy to take questions and have conversation with you. So we were just really struck across both subjects that when teaching candidates did report having substantial learning opportunities in the area of general teaching methods, and this pays off for enacting content-specific ambitious practices, this actually provides empirical support for some conceptual arguments that Sigrid Blomeke, other authors have made. We haven't had a lot of attention to general teaching methods from a research standpoint, and maybe this is something overlooked. It's a key part of a number of teacher education programs, and it really seems to make a difference for the teachers in this sample. So what we were struck with our findings on teaching self-efficacy is that when you have a high level of that, at least with regard to teaching math, this makes a difference for your classroom management practices as a first-year teacher. And we're sort of interpreting that as the teacher's self-efficacy may be driven by being good at classroom management. This may give you confidence in at least aspiring to try certain things with your math instruction. It didn't necessarily pay off as first-year teachers in enacting math practices, ambitious practices well, but it may give you a certain level of confidence given that's associated with your classroom management. And I should have brought this out a little bit more on the findings. In terms of these opportunities to learn during student teaching, they pay off for ambitious practices, but less so for classroom management practices. And again, it might point to the fact that there may be some trade-offs during clinical placements or student teaching if one person as a teaching candidate really has opportunities to be developing content-specific practices. Are they, at least with this sample, also developing strong classroom management practices? Okay, we'll go back to this broader finding, and we've seen this in other studies for beginning teachers. When their classroom management practices are strong, this can translate to being able to enact rigorous, ambitious, high-quality teaching practices in reading and mathematics. This sort of points to the need that teaching candidates, whether they're going through coursework or student teaching, need multiple opportunities to develop strong classroom environment skills. This should not be overlooked in a program that's focusing on helping candidates learn to teach math well, helping people to focus on other aspects of content-specific teaching. One thing that's true in the study, we've seen this in some other studies of beginning teacher development, is the associations between classroom environment and ambitious instruction were stronger in math and ELA. And then a little bit more broadly, to learn and other factors seem to explain more of the variance in the sample of the first-year teacher's math instruction compared to variance in their ELA instruction. This may be in part that math instruction in this country for many elementary teachers is not their favorite subject. A lot of them lack high levels of math knowledge for teaching or self-efficacy, and there may simply be more variation there in practices across the sample. Where is some of this work going to go from here? Talking specifically about the project I'm discussing today, the Elementary Teacher Preparation Project. We did follow many of the 83 teachers into their second year of teaching, and we observed them and rated their teaching using Plato. So we'd like to continue to look at this question of how opportunity to learn, other aspects of teacher preparation, maybe also aspects of the school context, seem to be associated with second-year teachers' math and reading practices. The qualitative work, especially work by Pam Grossman, has shown that sometimes we need to sort of focus on the second year of teaching to begin to see like a clear impact of teacher preparation. Once someone has really gotten their legs underneath them, they've survived the first year, they're better at classroom management. So we're really interested to see if we pick up maybe some additional aspects of teacher prep are making a difference for second-year teachers. But there's a lot of interesting questions about the role of principal leadership, around instructional coaching. Maybe it's first and second year teachers' own perceptions of how well they fit with their teaching colleagues and their school environments that might drive instructional quality. So that is a direction we'd like to go with this research. And to tell you a little bit more about me as I wrap up, I am part of our project with Lee McLean. She's a colleague at University of Delaware, and in some ways it's building on the study I presented today. This is really focusing just on elementary math teacher preparation. It does not have a focus on reading. And Lee and some colleagues have a real interest in candidate mental health, in how that might explain how much people take advantage of opportunity to learn, or how that translates into their enactment of math instruction. We're also going to look at teacher retention and compared to the ETPP study, and we're going to try to understand some possible effects on student math learning. And then, in part as a result of the challenges of scoring so many instructional videos, I have gotten interested with a colleague in computer science in whether neural networks, which are a form of AI, could actually be used to do some of the work of humans in classifying instructional activities in videos of instruction. So this would be a project with two goals. One, can we help make this process of scoring videos less time-consuming, more efficient? And maybe in doing so, are there ways to provide more direct feedback to teaching candidates or teachers or those who work with them on key aspects of their instruction? So whether it's during today's meeting or outside of the meeting, I'm happy to talk about the future research studies, but I will come out of the screen share and see if folks want to raise any questions. And I'm open to both questions and critiques. We're hoping to take this work forward and open to ways in which you might disagree or suggest we should consider new or different things. Great, I see
Thank
a hand.
you so much.
Simone, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a fabulous talk and super interesting. This is a cross between a question and a critique, and I'll just highlight the fact that I think this work is really valuable and really important. So please don't misunderstand me. But one thing I find a little disappointing is just the and I understand, I think, why you would focus specifically on math and ELA rather than, say, social studies and science, teaching history. But the thing that's always disappointing to me is that I feel like in this moment, especially where we're facing global climate change that's catastrophic, and the kind of erosion of democratic governance in lots of places, and the rise of authoritarian populism and autocracies, and so anyway, I would love for the content preparation to really refer across the curriculum and not just to math and ELA. But I think I understand why you did it, and I would love to hear you just talk more about it, especially in light of the fact that my understanding is that there are lots of elementary schools wherein we're not seeing social studies instruction at all. It's being stripped out in support of ELA and mathematics. And then just relatedly, I think just to your last point about how for lots of elementary teachers in traditional preparation programs, mathematics is not what they want to do and not what they like. What that's meant here, I'll just say, is that there are 4 courses that elementary teacher prep students take in mathematics to prepare them. And there's 1 in social studies and 1 in science. So even the kinds of exposures you're talking about aren't are very much part of this study that you did. Anyway, I will just say thank you. I really enjoyed the talk and I really appreciate it.
Simone, I could talk about this for 45 minutes or an hour. So I'm going to try to talk to you about it for 3 or 4 minutes, and then
Great.
Whether it makes sense to talk outside of this, but I appreciate you raising these questions. And there's a lot of different directions this could go in. So I think one place I'll start with is there is a potential benefit if someone comes along and is interested in a similar study and uses what I would call a generic observation instrument. One was developed by my former dean at University of Virginia, classroom assessment scoring system that can be used for elementary math or elementary social studies or elementary science. And a number of you are familiar with the Danielson framework for teaching. That was also sort of set up to do that. So I think one of the questions or issues or tensions is, let's say there's another study somewhat similar, and there's a real emphasis on learning about opportunities to learn to teach history, social studies as an elementary teacher, and then trying to learn some things about self-efficacy, content knowledge for teaching, and then following people into their first or second year. I think just a question would be, is a good way to get at that like a content-specific observation tool? is a good way to get at that class or framework for teaching. So I have a bit of a bias. I butted heads with my previous dean. I respect him, that there is value in doing research that's trying to learn content-specific things through an observation instrument, through a measure of knowledge, through a measure of self-efficacy. So as we, as a broader field, continue to have instruments, and there are people working on this that allow us to really go and look at elementary science or elementary social studies, by all means, our study can be critiqued the way you've critiqued it, but we need to do that to understand more broadly what it means for individual people to teach well or teach not as well across different subjects. But by doing that sort of work, it sort of sends a message about the importance of science being part of the K-5 curriculum, social studies being part of the K-5 curriculum, but also, this is the second point you're making, part of the teacher prep curriculum. So as our broader field continues to develop their measures, I'm with you. Absolutely. And I appreciate the critique that too often reading and math are the ones that get privileged. So this is a great question. Like, what are the courses that someone should be taking in general as a teaching candidate? And what are the decisions that a given program makes? At our institution, it's 3 courses in reading and 1 in math. And so some people in elementary teacher prep raise concerns about that. And these are sort of questions about values and also questions about what is going to sort of put people in relatively strong positions to succeed. So I'm with you that there's an importance for elementary candidates to be doing coursework across these different disciplines, whether it's content only or content methods. And then there's also that these people are human and we can't ask them to do too many things. So I'm happy for you to respond now or have further communication, but both points are well taken. I appreciate you raising them.
No, I just want to say thank you. I agree. Thank you. Thank you.
And critiques are good. I'm open to critiques. Other questions?
I have one. I always want to make space in case other people do, but I'd be curious to hear you talk a bit about how classroom management was measured and any concerns with that. And then what you're seeing in the literature and your own practice about how to develop those skills among teacher candidates. Thank
you. Okay, thanks for asking. Try to be specific in my response here. So to give you folks a little bit of background, I was going into this a little bit with my response to Simone. Plato focuses on these 3 instructional domains, but it also focuses on what Plato refers to as classroom environment, which is another way of talking about classroom management. There's 2 key parts to this. It gets at behavior management and it gets at time management. And Lesley, if it's okay with you, I'm briefly just going to do a screen share, and I'm happy to share this. This is the Plato tool outside of just our. So we'll do behavior management first. And you can sort of get oriented by looking at the 4 or the 3. A lot of teaching candidates and first-year teachers for classroom environment in general, they're probably going to get 3s and 4s unless someone's struggling. And then I'll show you time management. And so if this was like the be-all end-all for the observation tool, and for that matter, like a general principles of teaching course, I think our research team would say we have some concerns, we have some limitations, but we would sort of actually argue, compared to some other content-specific observation tools, by having this here, it gives us some useful information to sort of complement what is also being addressed by the observation tool. And I think the time management in particular, I think a challenge in particular with teaching candidates, first and second year teachers, is a big part of like becoming a good instructor is how you figure out ways to minimize interruptions, like reduce the amount of time that's just devoted to your students lining up, moving into transitions, things like that. I think there was a second part of your question, Lesley, not just how we're measuring it, but maybe a little bit more to it.
What you've seen in the literature and in your own School of Ed about how to help future teachers develop that capacity.
Okay, this is kind of like Simone's question. You guys are asking like the fundamental questions. This is good. So only so much can be learned from one or a couple courses. You can lay out principles about setting up a productive learning environment, working on rules and routines. I think a big part of this is what someone can learn from a cooperating teacher or a mentor teacher. A big part of this is the opportunities as a student teacher, or for that matter, a full-time teacher, to start enacting things and learning from mistakes. Just saying a little bit about our particular teacher education program. One of my colleagues, Tish Jennings, does a lot of research on teacher mindfulness, and a real effort was made in our elementary teacher prep program to make our classroom management course focus on teacher mindfulness. And it just didn't take with the fourth year students and the master's students here. So a certain amount of people at the age of 22 or mid-20s as they're entering teaching are going to ask for and need a little bit of how to, even if once they become full-time teachers, they start to understand it's a little bit more complex than that. And they need to think about their own identity, their own orientation, ways in which mindfulness itself might make a difference. So I think it's important to have a course in it. I think it's important to link sort of what people are learning in the course to their opportunities in the field with a cooperating teacher and their own practice to learn. But part of this is just developing these skills over time. I'm not sure if I'm helping respond to your question. Yeah. So we would sort of say, just in general, having a course that's getting at general principles of instruction, as long as that's addressing student motivation, student engagement, is a way of sort of helping people, think about classroom management activities. Question?
Oh, my bad.
Go for it.
So we do have a question from the chat from Dr. Nancy Kendall. Relatedly, Peter, could you speak a bit more to how you scored videos and some of the challenges that this posed?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So I think the question is just in general, in taking on work like this, like how we sort of went about just setting up this process. So my colleague Julie Cohen had helped as a grad student to develop Plato. So she knew the Plato instrument really well. She worked on this project with me and our other colleagues as an assistant professor. She was here at UVA and she's still here. So she sort of had the lead role. We did a training, I'd say for about 2.5 full days, kind of the summer before we started doing any observations. We probably had about 10 or 12 people who went through the training and had roles as scorers, including myself. And one of the things we were paying attention to was we were interested in making sure people had K through 12 experience and ideally K through 5 experience. I think some of the people we trained as scorers had taught English like at the middle or high school level, but many of them had elementary teaching experience. And then part of this is having people do practice scoring, see how close they are to sort of a expert scorer's work, and then having conversations about what they're seeing that's different, like how we can help them just at the initial stage, be scoring in a way that gives us confidence. And then there's sort of this long process of collecting a lot of video, having people are trained as scorers, assigning them to score, and then doing a certain amount of regular check-ins to make sure, we call that calibration, people are still scoring in a reliable way. So to be totally honest, if we finished collecting video data from second year teachers in 2018-19, it probably took another 12 or 18 months before we finished scoring. It's just very demanding. One of the ways it works with Plato is the lesson might be 45 minutes, but the scorer scores 15-minute segments according to the entire rubric. So they do one segment, might watch it a second time, take notes, score it, and then they look at another 15-minute segment, and then you're sort of averaging their scores across a 30 or 45-minute lesson. Nancy, I just want to see if I'm addressing this, or you might have wanted to come at this differently.
I think she said she was not going to be able to talk. She's had a meeting with her child, but she was able to listen. So it sounded to me like you mentioned the possibility of developing AI help to score them. And so I think it was probably prompted by like, what would that take and what might be some of the limitations That's where I was thinking anyway.
Oh, I can take that. Thanks for raising it. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Nancy has a follow-up
She
too.
said, if you don't mind a follow-up, sorry. What do you do when there are differences of opinions about how certain interactions or behaviors should be scored, and the differences represent real differences in ideas about teaching, learning, or engagement?
Okay, that is a very good question. I think the approach here is to sort of say Plato represents certain like philosophy or understanding of effective teaching. And there can be an issue, even if there aren't disagreements of someone, just for whatever reason, teaching is complex, what's in a video is complex. There may be an issue of someone not sort of scoring in a consistent way according to the rubric. But let's say it's not that issue, that someone just simply doesn't feel able, but there's more a fundamental disagreement. Part of what we do, at least initially, is sort of look for ways, can we sort of talk through what the disagreement is? We, as part of the calibration, will often have people, sometimes a group of people, score the same video with Julie. But if someone really just has a much different way of interpreting what's happening, different beliefs about sort of what constitutes good teaching, probably where we end up there is that we would at a certain point just have them stop scoring. There is a bit of there's a set of values associated with Plato, and there's other ways of sort of thinking about defining effective reading instruction, defining effective math instruction. And what we're not going to do is like make major changes to the instrument in the middle of the study. And that's for better or worse. It's a really good question. I appreciate the question. Lesley, I could take up your question, which is a little bit different. Just go back. Yep, Nancy responded to that. Okay. So I had a colleague about 4 or 5 years ago. His area is more statistics and measurement. And I was having a beer with him. And he said, you know, there's just so much collection of video. Do you think that one of the things that could be done would be to use what now we might say is some of the technology used in ChatGPT, some of this neural network technology, to at least identify some of the things in videos. And then when the human comes to sort of look at this 45-minute lesson in mathematics, a few things would already be clear, either to the teacher themselves who was video recorded or the person evaluating it. So it took me 3 or 4 months just to get my head around what the person was proposing. And we got a $10,000 seed grant from our university to try to explore this. The person I work with in engineering has done this, but with a much different context. He takes biomedical imaging, biomedical exams, and trains neural networks to do some of the analysis of what's there. Teaching is a lot more complex in the sense that his work is only with video data, not with audio. I do know of some other groups, and one of them includes a graduate of Wisconsin-Madison, Sean Kelly at Pittsburgh. They have worked with audio data from secondary ELA classrooms. There's some people at the University of Colorado who've done this with audio and video data of elementary, middle school math teachers. So it's possible to train neural networks to recognize like a finite number of things, a small number of things, but they can get at really rich aspects of teaching. Both of those groups have done work training neural networks to recognize the nature of teachers' questions for students, in such things as how is the teacher respond to student comments. So I don't think we would see in the next 3 to 5 years neural networks doing the work of the principal or the teacher educator or the researcher who's looking at a whole video. But it could be, this goes back to Nancy's first question, if someone has to watch a video for 45 minutes and then spend another 45 minutes to an hour really exerting a lot of cognitive energy to try to make some assessments of what's happening there for formative purposes or for summative purposes, it could be that the neural network reduces some of that cognitive load or points to certain things that are happening regularly. So that's where we hope the research would go. We are still in the early stages or the middle of it, and I'm happy to hear critiques about that or for people to follow up on it. But there's a few groups in the US who are trying to tackle this. Yep, go ahead. I see a hand. That is Erica. Hi, Erica.
Yeah, hi, Peter. Thanks so much for the talk, and I really appreciated actually the connections between the connections we're making kind of cross various things. And forgive me if I missed this when I stepped out for the bathroom, but my question was, you mentioned at the beginning that some districts did not allow you to observe teachers, and that in general kind of just made me think about how district context might have mattered, or broader context might have mattered to the findings that you had. And so I didn't quite catch if you were able to attend to any kind of nestedness in, I mean, it's not a lot of numbers for that kind of an analysis, so probably not, but or any kind of sense of how broader context might have also played into these findings that you had.
So this is definitely like an EPS UW audience. With each question, it could probably go for 30 or 45 minutes. And I know we're running short on time. So if I'm not giving you a full answer, I'm happy to interact a little bit outside of this session. So let me take the ways in which we were not addressing context in the study first, and then I'll say a little bit more about the larger issue of just the districts. I would say we've done a fair amount of qualitative work and written some papers that really focus in depth on small number of teachers. So I think that's a place where we've been able to sort of ask questions about the nature of the math curriculum, resources available in the school, some things about sort of demographics of students, like the broader community context. The way in which, thanks, Bill, thanks for coming. The way in which it enters into the quantitative analyses is kind of the typical, what do we know about the SES of the students of the school? What do we know about just some other broad features? So I don't think it's been a main focus of the quantitative work, but it's absolutely relevant to developing good classroom management practices, like trying to enact ambitious instruction. So I think it comes through a little bit more in our qualitative work. And then just to speak directly with the districts, I think what we found with some of the districts, some of them were particularly large districts where we had a fair amount of graduates from 2 of the programs. And I think they just were not focused on a partnership with the researchers who were studying teacher prep, almost sort of saying, once the teachers come here, it's going to be up to us to sort of figure out training them to teach our curriculum. And then maybe some of this is also, at least in our state of Virginia, larger districts are going to get a fair amount of requests to do research, and they're going to pick and choose which ones to be part of. So Erica, I don't know if I'm starting to address your question.
No, that was, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I could always ask follow-ups, but that was really helpful. Thank you.
But absolutely, context is key to what we're looking at, even if we, with the quantitative work, have not studied it in depth. Any last questions, comments, others?
If I could ask just really quickly, it's somewhat related to the context piece, but also you said that one of the goals for future research is looking at second year and maybe beyond as well. Can you share any preliminary findings about kind of how long some of these effects that you're noticing may stick around or may change, or what happens?
I'm going to send you an email at some point, Emily. So the second year teachers, we kept about 70 of them in the study, and we're sort of just starting to do some analysis. And I think the big broad question is it mostly your school environment at that point, like interactions with an instructional coach, things about your principal's leadership, things about the curriculum at that point that's going to drive this, or there's still going to be maybe some of the exact same things, your general methods course that you took, some opportunities to learn and try out math strategies during student teaching. So don't have anything yet. That's sort of what we're in the middle of this academic year. But going back to some of the qualitative work, Pam Grossman's work in particular, we started the study sort of with the hypothesis that maybe the second year is where we'd see even more of an impact, like associations with teacher prep experiences. But at this point, I am starting to think it may come more from some of our measures of what's happening in the school context. But happy to follow up with you about that.
I'll bring it to a close. There's lots more to discuss and to think about. You've left us with a lot to think about, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, Peter. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a great opportunity for me. I appreciate everyone coming today. Go Badgers.